The next morning I woke up to a quiet house. The same creak in the hallway. The same smell of coffee drifting through the air. But something felt different. Lighter. For years I had lived under the weight of being dismissed, ignored, and treated like an afterthought. But last night, I finally let that go. I sat by the window, sipping my coffee, watching the sun rise behind the maple trees. For once, I didn't feel regret. I felt peace. Then came a soft knock at the door. At first, I thought it was the mailman, but when I opened it, there she was, Emily. Her hair was messy, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She clutched a small box in her trembling hands. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I didn't say a word. I simply stepped aside and let her enter. She sat on the same couch where she used to do her homework years ago, legs too short to touch the floor back then. Now she was grown, but in that moment, she looked like that same little girl again. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "I don't know what came over me, Dad. I wanted everyone to laugh. I thought it'd be harmless, but when you showed that video," her voice cracked, "I realized how cruel I've become. You didn't deserve that. Not after everything you've done for me." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she opened the box and handed it to me. Inside was a framed photo, me and her mother, smiling on our 25th anniversary. Below it, in her handwriting, were the words, "To the man who taught me everything, I forgot your worth, but I'll never forget your love." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall, each tick echoing the years that had passed between us. The sunlight outside had started to fade, painting long shadows across the living room. Dust danced lazily in the air, and for a moment it felt as if time itself had stopped. Just me, my daughter, and the ghosts of everything left unsaid. Finally, I broke the silence. My voice was softer than I expected, almost trembling. "Do you know what hurt the most, Emily?" I asked, staring at the photograph of her mother on the shelf. It wasn't the video. It wasn't the laughter. It was realizing how easy it was for you to forget who raised you. Her eyes filled with tears. She tried to speak, but no words came. Her hand shook slightly as she wiped her cheeks. "I know," she whispered finally. "And I'm sorry, Dad. I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you. If you'll let me." I looked at her. Really looked. Not as the grown woman sitting in front of me, but as the little girl who once clung to my leg when thunderstorms scared her. The one who begged me to stay up late just to tell her one more story before bed. The one who believed her dad could fix anything, from broken toys to broken hearts, and in that moment, something inside me cracked. The anger I'd been holding onto for so long began to melt away, replaced by a quiet ache. My voice softened. "I don't need perfect children, Emily," I said. "I just needed ones who remembered where love came from." She broke then, really broke. Tears streamed down her face as she reached for my hand, holding it tightly, as if she was afraid to let go again. "I remember now," she sobbed. "I promise I do." The clock kept ticking, but this time it didn't sound so lonely. The distance that once felt impossible to cross had suddenly disappeared, replaced by something fragile but real. As I looked into my daughter's eyes, I realized something. Sometimes love isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about finding your way back through it. We didn't talk much after that. Words weren't needed anymore. The weight that had hung between us for years was finally lifting, piece by piece, like clouds breaking after a long storm. I moved slowly toward the kitchen, the faint sound of the kettle whistling filling the quiet space. She followed behind me, her footsteps soft, almost uncertain, like a child afraid to wake a dream. I poured her a cup of tea, the same way her mother used to make it, 2 spoons of sugar, no milk. She smiled faintly when she saw that, as if a memory flickered behind her eyes. Then, without saying a word, she opened the fridge, took out the eggs, and began whisking them just like her mother used to, gentle, patient. A rhythm I hadn't seen in years. The silence between us wasn't cold anymore. It was peaceful, healing, the kind of silence where hearts speak louder than words ever could. As the egg sizzled on the pan, she glanced at me and said softly, "I told everyone what I did." Her voice trembled. "They all know the truth now. I even apologized to Mom's side of the family." She paused, her eyes glistening. "I was ashamed for so long, Dad. But I'm done hiding from it. I'm proud to call you my father again." For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, my chest heavy with emotions I couldn't name. All those years of disappointment, loneliness, and silence, it was all melting away in that small, ordinary kitchen. I smiled faintly, my voice low but steady. "Then maybe," I said, "this Thanksgiving wasn't ruined after all." She let out a shaky laugh, wiping her eyes. "No," she said softly, "it was saved." Outside, the evening light spilled through the window, painting the room in gold. The aroma of her mother's scrambled eggs filled the air, and for a second, I could almost feel her presence, warm, proud, watching over us. We sat together at the small table, clinking our forks against the plates, laughing between bites, remembering old stories, the kind we thought we'd forgotten, and, as I looked across the table at my daughter, the same little girl who once used to sit on my lap, eating pancakes on Sunday mornings, I realized something profound. Thanksgiving isn't about the feast or the guests. It's about the moments that bring us back to what truly matters. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't break us. They bring us home. That afternoon, I received a message on my phone, a notification that Emily had uploaded a new video. For a second, I hesitated. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure I had the strength to face whatever it was. But curiosity, and maybe a sliver of hope, made me press play. There she was, sitting alone in her kitchen. Her hair was a little messy, her eyes red and swollen. I could tell she'd been crying for a while. The lighting was soft, the kind that makes everything look fragile and real. She took a shaky breath, looked straight into the camera and said, "This video isn't for likes or views. It's for every person who's ever taken their parents for granted." Her voice trembled, breaking halfway through. "I humiliated my father," she said, tears streaming down her face. "And instead of cutting me off, he taught me love through forgiveness. I'll never forget that. If you still have your parents, call them, visit them. Don't wait for guilt to be your teacher." I sat there frozen, the phone trembling slightly in my hands. For the first time, her words weren't just an apology. They were a message to the world. The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was everywhere. Facebook, TikTok, even the evening news. Comment after comment poured in, each one more emotional than the last. One person wrote, "I haven't spoken to my dad in 5 years. I'm calling him now." Another said, "Your father raised you right. The world needs more men like him." A mother commented, "Your story made me cry. I'm hugging my son tonight, tighter than ever." I scrolled through hundreds of messages, my heart swelling with emotions I couldn't describe. Each word felt like a spark of healing, not just for me and Emily, but for families all over the world who had forgotten what love looked like. A few days later, Emily came over again, holding her phone. "Dad," she said softly, "your story, it changed people. Look." She showed me messages from strangers, people who had reunited with their parents, who had driven across states just to say, "I'm sorry." One video even showed an elderly man crying as his daughter surprised him at his doorstep after years apart. Tears blurred my vision. For so long, I thought my life had become a quiet shadow, forgotten, outdated, left behind. But now, it was something more. My pain had become someone else's lesson. My forgiveness had sparked forgiveness in others. Emily reached across the table, taking my hand. "You didn't just forgive me," she whispered. "You reminded the world what forgiveness looks like." I looked at her, this grown woman who had once been a stubborn, proud child, and smiled. "No," I said quietly. "You reminded them. I just gave you the chance to." Outside, the late autumn sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the world in shades of gold and orange. The smell of roasted turkey drifted through the neighborhood. Thanksgiving dinner in the making. I stood up, glanced out the window, and said, "Come on, let's go make something special for dinner. It's Thanksgiving, after all." Emily laughed softly, wiping her tears. "What should we make?" I smiled. "Your mother's recipe, of course." She nodded, smiling through her tears, And for the first time in what felt like forever, our home felt full again, not just of laughter or noise, but of forgiveness, of love, of something that words could never fully capture. And as I stirred the pot and watched her set the table, I thought to myself, sometimes the things that break us are the same things that bring us closer. And sometimes healing doesn't come from forgetting the past. It comes from finally understanding it. As I read those comments, a tear rolled down my cheek, not out of pride, but out of pure gratitude, because maybe, just maybe, the pain I endured had helped someone else heal. It's strange how life works. Sometimes the wounds that hurt us the most become the lessons that heal others. A year later, Thanksgiving came around again. The air was cold but calm, carrying that familiar scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. My house wasn't buzzing with noise like it used to be. The table was smaller now, just me, Emily, her husband, and my grandson Daniel. No fancy setup, no extravagant dishes, just the aroma of roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and the warmth of family, the kind that doesn't need decorations to feel real. Emily moved around the kitchen, laughing softly as she tried to keep Daniel from sneaking bites of pie before dinner. Watching her, I felt a quiet peace. There was a time I thought I'd never see this, my daughter smiling, not out of pretense or guilt, but out of genuine happiness. When everything was ready, she brought out the turkey, her hands trembling slightly as she set it down. She looked around the table, her eyes glistening. "Dad," she began, voice soft but steady, "before we eat, I want to say something." She stood up, holding her glass, her husband placing a gentle hand on her back for support. The room fell silent. Even little Daniel stopped fidgeting, sensing that something important was about to be said. "Last year," she said, taking a deep breath, "I thought Thanksgiving was about showing off, about posting pictures online, about being admired, about having the perfect life. I thought it was about what others saw, not what we felt. But I was wrong." She paused, her voice trembling. "Now I know Thanksgiving is about being thankful for the people who never gave up on you, even when you didn't deserve it." Her gaze met mine. Her lips quivered and her eyes shimmered with tears that refused to stay hidden. "To my father," she said, raising her glass higher, "for forgiving me when I didn't forgive him, for teaching me love when I only showed pride, for standing tall when I tried to tear him down. You showed me what real strength looks like, Dad. It's not in words, it's in forgiveness." The room grew still, the only sound the faint crackling of the fireplace. My chest tightened, and I had to look away for a second to compose myself. I'd never been good with words, never been one for emotional speeches, but that night I didn't need them. Her words were enough. I stood slowly, my hands trembling slightly as I raised my own glass. "Emily," I said softly, "you've already given me more than I could ever ask for. You gave me back my family." She smiled through her tears, and for a long, quiet moment, we simply looked at each other, father and daughter, bound not by blood alone, but by forgiveness, by lessons learned the hard way, by love that had been lost and found again. Daniel suddenly broke the silence with a small laugh. "Grandpa," he said innocently, "are you crying?" I chuckled, wiping my eyes. "Maybe a little," I admitted, "but only because this turkey smells so good." The table erupted with laughter, light and genuine, filling the house with warmth I hadn't felt in years. As we began to eat, I looked around the table at Emily, her husband, my grandson, and I realized something powerful. Forgiveness doesn't just rebuild relationships, it rebuilds generations. That night, as the plates emptied and the fire burned low, I sat back and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Not for the food, not even for the second chance, but for the journey that led us here, through pain, pride, humiliation, and healing. Because sometimes the most beautiful Thanksgivings aren't the ones filled with noise or perfection. They're the ones that remind you what really matters: love, forgiveness, and family. I raised my glass too. "To second chances," I said softly. We clinked glasses, and the room filled with warmth. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. I felt loved. Later that night, after everyone left, I sat by the fireplace and took out the photo Emily had given me, the one of me and her mother. The firelight flickered across our smiles. I whispered, "You were right, Mary. Sometimes love needs to break before it can shine." And then, with a small smile, I looked at the family portrait on the mantel. Emily. Her husband, my grandson, and me, all together again. I closed my eyes and whispered my final thought, the one I hoped the world would remember. Age doesn't make you worthless. It makes you a library of love, lessons, and strength. And one day, those who mock your pages will come back to learn from them